Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this final screencast for Green Infrastructure and Sustainable Cities for the 2018-2019 academic year. This morning I'll go through what you can expect to hear on the revision session and give you a few tips about how you might want to tackle the exam. So first up, as I said the last week, that the exam is 2 hours. Standard sort of format we have here at University of Manchester. You have to answer 2 questions from the 6 asked, and the exam is worth 50% of the module mark. Each question that you answer will be weighted equally, so they will both be worth 50% of the overall mark. So what I would say is you need to spend sufficient time and effort on both questions, because you can't simply rely on doing one question really well and the other question maybe less so. In terms of doing the exam, I would say use your time wisely. Actually read the questions being asked, so actually do what they ask you to do, and potentially sketch out a plan for each question, because what will happen is that when they get marked, if you've missed something out, we might award marks for the ideas that you would have put in, but that's not guaranteed, so you have to be quite careful. And think about how you're going to link the key ideas, the key themes and the examples from across the different lectures, and how they might actually address different questions in the exam. So most of the things that we have been learning about over the last few weeks have an applicability in more than one question. So some of the overarching ideas about context, about scale, about focus, about multifunctionality, connectivity will apply to more than one question. So please be aware that you will have to study and revise more than, say, 2 or 3 subjects, because actually, although there will be thematic questions, there will be more overarching ideas as well. I'm expecting essay-style answers, so a proper structure, introduction, main body of the argument, conclusion, with referencing in the text. Now what this means is that I expect you to actually be able to cite key material in the text, but I am not expecting a bibliography. And to ensure that you do well, make sure you provide sufficient detail and information for both answers. So don't really go to town on one of the answers and then give me a half-page, 1-page reply for the second one. Because what you need to be able to show is your broader knowledge and understanding of the areas that we're talking about, and how you actually can address those answers with examples, with key examples of the literature, with case studies, and all those sort of things. And finally, for this bit, don't panic. Read the question, do what it's asking you to do. You all know the information, you know the material, so you can do this, and you just need to structure what you're doing effectively. Now, in terms of what you might want to think about, the picture on the right is the map outside my office with different examples of good and bad GI on there. So, for instance, people think University Green outside the University of Manchester is good, and things like the smog and pollution in Santiago in Chile because of the lack of green space is bad. Now, what I'd hoped for this map would be that you'd all come along and put on where you think were good and bad things. It's not quite happened that way, but this map does show a few areas where you might want to pick examples from. So, for instance, in Mexico City, they started to green the flyovers and the structures holding up motorways to take out some of the smog and the pollutants from traffic. They also make it look nice, so people are less aggressive potentially as they're on their commute to work. The Emerald Necklace we've talked about quite a lot in terms of its flood mitigation, its property values, its wildlife and biodiversity improvement, its connectivity as part of a recreational corridor. So these are some of the ideas you can work with to try and develop and further complement your answers. But in terms of what we would have spoken about last Thursday in the seminar, we would have talked about context, about how people, place and policy all work together, how the financing of GI is important in terms of what we do, how we do it, and what is actually delivered. And then things about governance, health and well-being, sustainable places, what policy and how is policy being developed. And the thing to remember about all these is that there are interlinkages between each of these areas, so between different places and different sites. So what we have, where we have it and why, who is actually delivering GI, and who are they delivering it for. So is GI equitable, for instance, and how are we going about doing this? Is it in a public way? Is it in a sort of private business way? So all these things are quite important, and the notions that context and different geospatial differences are there to help structure GI and how we think about it should be something that you think about within your answers. And just a couple of examples of how you might start thinking about some of these ideas. So both these examples of the Olympic Park in London and the High Line in New York have been very successful in delivering GI in high density urban areas. So you've got a very multifunctional, very diverse landscape for the Olympic Park, public-private investment, a whole set of different recreational, economic and environmental climate change functions for each of these ones. But you might think it's actually not that great, or it's really, really good. So you can think about how that development has changed that landscape, has maybe improved it in some ways but not in others, how the landscape is delivering different functions for different peoples at the same time. And you can think about the scale here and how it links into that part of East London, but how it also maybe fits into the wider All London Green Grid. The High Line is a lot smaller, so only about a mile and a half long, but actually it's delivered a very, very popular, accessible, functional, connective space on the Lower West Side, and it's had a massive impact on the local economic development of the area, and you can argue whether that's been good or bad for people who lived there previously to people who live there now. So within both of these examples, the notions of different people using the place, different policies being used to support them, different ways in which the environment is benefiting people or society or the economy can be discussed. In addition, we have to think about how we look at different cities and their green space, and how we look at the way in which we value and plan for and manage these spaces. So, for instance, London is between 47 and 49% green and open space, depending on who you ask, not including the green belt. But is that green space all of the same quality, of the same accessibility, and is it providing equity across the whole of London, or is it actually better in some places than others? So the Green Network is incredibly prominent in promoting London as a green city, but actually, is it delivering the things that people really, really need? So you can question there about whether you live in the South London, the North, the East or the West, whether you'd get the same experience and the same value from these places as other parts of the city. The middle picture with the Milan GI network, you've got the Parco Sud, which is a large agricultural and forestry area coming abutting the city, and it has quite distinctive climatic, water management and biodiversity benefits. And the fact that Milan and the region of Lombardy are trying to actually take the green space out of the city in spurs to actually make it a much wider GI network to allow people to move freely between the urban area and the more wider open countryside. And again, here you've got different ideas about accessibility, about land value, about whether people use these spaces in the same way, and how that might change in the future. And finally, on the left, you've got the Atlanta Beltline, so a place that was developed to address some of the car-centric issues around Atlanta, to actually make a walking trail that went through every district, to promote non-car-based transport, and to provide a greater equity, because Atlanta has quite a lot of social inequality in terms of its population. But again, there's been issues here about gentrification, about land values increasing, about who the Beltline is for, and it's delivered by a private company. So do they have the best interests of the entire city of Atlanta at heart, or are they trying to improve the economic prosperity of the area? So each of these different examples provides you with a number of different insights into how GI can be created, what it's being created for, who it's being created for, and what it might do in terms of the effectiveness of climate management, flood mitigation, biodiversity promotion, recreation, social well-being, and other things. And so finally, the thing I just want to reiterate is don't panic. Read the questions, do what they're asking you to do, You all know the material. You all should hopefully understand it by now. You've got the crib sheets. You've got the previous podcasts. You've got all the material online. There's a massive reading list to work from. There's lots of information that you can do, and if you spend a few minutes at the start of the exam just thinking about how you want to structure your answers and what examples you might use to answer the question, and therefore what material, what references you might use as well, you should be really, really focused in terms of what you can deliver. But again, the material will be based on the thematic lectures, but also that understanding of the broader context of scale, functionality, connectivity, access to nature that we've spoken about throughout. So it would be wise to try and link these broader ideas to specific themes or specific questions and examples. So we'll go through this more on Thursday during the revision session, but these are just some of the things to think about in terms of addressing the exam and structuring your revision. And finally, just say good luck and thank you all for taking the class. It's been really enjoyable to teach, and I hope you've enjoyed it. And see you all on Thursday.